Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. May I please welcome you to the 14th South China Sea International Conference hosted by the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, or the DAV. I would like to go over just a few housekeeping rules before we start it. For our on-site delegate, kindly put your personal device on silent mode and only use your microphone when it is your turn. And for our online participants, you can feel free to take part in our conference by typing your comments or questions in the Q&A chat box or click the raise hand button on Zoom. Our conference is also live streamed on multiple platforms such as our Facebook Nghiên cứu Biển Đông and our YouTube South China Sea Studies. It will also be live tweeted on our Twitter South China Sea Connect, so please follow us on there as well. And now, without further ado, may I have the honor to invite Dr. Phạm Lan Dung, Acting President of the DAV, to come up stage to deliver the opening remark. Dr. Dung, please.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 14th South China Sea International Conference. After 2 years of interruption, it is a pleasure for me personally and for the DAV to be convening this conference. I've always been proud to be in this particular event, one of the DAV's signature. Since 2008, the South China Sea Conference has brought together a collection of all-star experts from all countries of the world, policymakers, diplomats, business leaders who are united by their common interest in finding ways to promote peace, security, prosperity, and the rule of law in the region. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it was unfortunate that this year the world has been bombarded by a sequence of shocks. Day by day, from the world's most popular newspapers, the news is flooded with escalation spirals in the Korean Peninsula, Taiwan Straits on the edge of conflict, and humanitarian and energy crisis due to the Russia-Ukraine war. However, there is a significant paradox and insight lurking in those news coverages. The missing piece, I believe, is not so much why these hotspots erupted, but how such evolving geopolitical landscapes are interconnected and influence global peace and security. And equally important is how to navigate through these turbulent times. The Ukraine conflict suggests a deep truth, and that is, if Europe is not stable, as good the Indo-Pacific. This is because regions are all built on the basic principle of the UN Charter. They are also totally linked by the Indo-Pacific, a maritime lifeline that connects Asia with Europe and Africa. But successive shocks are connected as well. Failing to resolve one issue could exacerbate others. If existing norms against the acquisition of territory by force are compromised, other nations may feel empowered to launch the same operation. In an attempt to raise such alarming trends, should we call ourselves alarmists? Probably yes. We are living through a series of disruptions. So when this crisis knocks on our door, it's time to start worrying and be prepared. While mistakes are likely to be repeated, we believe that they can also be corrected and avoided. This is why the DAV is holding our flagship event under the theme, Peaceful Sea, Solid Recovery. To understand how the latest global geopolitical shifts played out in the South China Sea, identify potential risks, and find the way to restore trust, dialogue, and cooperation where they have been broken. People said that we are at the watershed moment, a fork in the road. Meanwhile, I believe that working together could prevent us from sinking deeper into violence and lawlessness and give the rule-based order a new lease of life. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, our agenda for these two-day meetings has naturally been shaped by the strategic dynamics in the Indo-Pacific. Major power strategies in this region remains a focal point, as do Southeast Asian nations' views on current geopolitical landscape. Military modernizations continue speedily. As each country follows its own national script for operation, exercise at seas frequently brings them dangerously close to one another. The rise in number and significance of multilateral security mechanism is surprising even the most experienced observers. All these issues are treated in depth in the conference. Accordingly, this conference will address the two main areas. As a starting point, we are going to situate the South China Sea in an evolving geopolitical landscape, including old and emerging contentious hotspots, effectiveness of existing and new governance structures, and the relevance of the UNCLOS at 40 and the DOC at 20 in the new context. In the second stage, we are forging best practices in the South China Sea in the quest for cooperation opportunities, stretching from capacity building to handle hybrid maritime threats, building rules of the road for non-traditional cross-cutting domains, promoting blue and green economic cooperation, and ensuring sustainable trade and supply chain. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, despite the current severe situation facing the international community, a very positive indicator I feel from the conference today is the reservoir of broad and deep support for our shared vision. I am inspired when our young leaders, the future generations, are eager to contribute their ideas to address the evolving security challenges. And additionally, let's join me in welcoming the Vietnamese diaspora for the first time to be a part of the discussion. Vietnamese, be it here or abroad, are standing side by side to build Vietnam as an active and responsible member of the international community. Having said that, I'm convinced that all of us are looking to a peaceful world we should strive for. On this occasion, I would like to express my appreciation to the keynote speakers, moderators, and speakers, and to extend our special thanks to our partners. Without your kind support, the 14th South China Sea Conference would not have been a reality. We wish to continue to have your company at future events. And to wrap up, let me tell you why we are here in Da Nang City. I must say that we are inspired by the remarkable developments and economic resilience in Da Nang, one of the most dynamic and creative cities in Vietnam and in the region. Therefore, I believe that a fresh and energetic atmosphere in Da Nang would fill us with hope for the future. And I also do hope that Vietnamese coffee and a bowl of quang noodles this morning may probably give you a spring in your step so that you could access the ballroom with energy and dedication. With that in mind, I wish this 14th South China Sea Conference great success, wishing all distinguished guests and delegates good health, great happiness, and a pleasant stay in Da Nang, Vietnam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Phạm Văn Dung. And now may I have the honor to invite His Excellencies, Deputy Ministers of the Ministries of Foreign Affairs of Vietnam, Mr. Phạm Quang Hieu, to come on stage.
morning. Dr. Phạm Lan Dung, Acting President of Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam, Joint Excellency, distinguished speakers and participants, ladies and gentlemen. It has always been a great pleasure to address this distinguished audience of South China Sea International Conference series in my capacity as Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Vietnam. Allow me to take this opportunity to welcome all of you again. Ambassador, representatives of diplomatic corps, distinguished speakers and guests who have managed to travel here to take part in this significant event this year entitled Peaceful Sea Solid Recovery. The COVID-19 pandemic has failed to interrupt this enduring conference series. This year, the conference will transform itself from hybrid to a mainly in-person event, returning from the pre-pandemic normal. For that reason, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude and appreciation to Dr. Phạm Lan Dung and her dedicated team at the DAV. They have made every effort to evolve this conference series into an irreplaceable avenue for peace and maritime cooperation in this region. Ladies and gentlemen, as we step out the COVID-19 pandemic, the road to sustainable economic recovery is still fraught with dangers and uncertainties. The global landscape has been experiencing rapid and unprecedented changes and disruption. Shifts in geopolitical realities, once unthinkable, have been observed in several parts of the world, including Indo-Pacific region. Multiple crises have exerted serious pressure on international system and economic and regional economies. Global geopolitical risks and major power rivalry have come to worsen the existing problems, such as energy security, food security, and stagflation. Security hotspots have also flared up to endanger regional peace and stability. Security architecture of the world and Indo-Pacific region are undergoing tremendous transformation. These challenges are multi-dimensional, multi-layered, and sometimes very difficult to identify. The blame should rest squarely on the deficit of trust and cooperative attitudes, especially deficit of trust in multilateral organization and international law. The lack of compliance to establish rules and norms may gradually erode the international rules-based order. More than ever, the international community expects a faithful compliance to the very institution that we have been building together for decades. States, especially major ones with far-reaching influence, have a duty to act with greater responsibility to global peace, stability, and development. The South China Sea, where various geopolitical interests overlap, lies at the center of the changing global landscape. The rules of the road in the South China Sea will have defined those in many other oceans and seas. As Indo-Pacific region is gaining more spotlights of attention in global strategic and economic mosaic, so is South China Sea. As the regional economic recovery depends on undisrupted maritime commerce and supply chain, the guarantee of freedom and maritime navigation and overflight is essentially needed. In other words, the maintenance of a rules-based order at sea, which lays emphasis on compliance, trust, and cooperation is more than ever required to ensure security recovery. Vietnam's South China Sea policy is to fully respect and faithfully implement the provision of international law, especially the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. Settle disputes peacefully in accordance with international law and United Nations charters, and promote maritime cooperation based on provision of UNCLOS. We believe that it is primary importance to uphold the Universal Charter Convention and make efforts in good faith to maintain its full implementation, an essential condition to preserve maritime rules-based order established by the convention. With the theme of this conference, Peaceful Sea and Solid Recovery, which signals that the well-intention of organizer and its partners to guide discussion towards addressing the challenges and uncertainties in South China Sea, thus putting forward specific initiative and proposal to promote cooperative activities and sustain post-pandemic recovery. A peaceful sea is a prerequisite condition for sustainable recovery. In this connection, I'd like to share some of my early thoughts on the topic as follows. First, we need to devise innovative measures to improve transparency and enhance strategic trust among regional parties, including confidence building measures or rules of the road to ensure safe engagement in maritime domains. Second, we need concrete action to work that help maintain political stability, sustain economic recovery, and encourage sustainable use of the sea to serve the common interests of economic development. This action and work should not only promote the habit of cooperation among regional parties, but also specifically target the indivisibility of regional supply chain and infrastructure connectivity. Third, we need initiative aimed at promoting multilateralism, especially the central role of ASEAN in facilitating engagement among regional parties on the basis of international law principles enshrined in the United Charter. This initiative should foster a multilateral approach to management of South China Sea and other regional security issues, while enhancing regional resilience and strategic autonomy of ASEAN. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a remarkable coincidence that this conference is held in the year that marked the 40th anniversary of UNCLOS. Our conference is thus an opportunity to reaffirm the significance of international law of the sea, particularly the UNCLOS, which provides the comprehensive legal framework in ocean and seas, including the conservation and sustainable use of the ocean and seas and their resources. This year also marked 20th anniversary of Declaration on Conduct of Party in the South China Sea, or DOC. Over the past 2 decades, parties to the DOC have worked together to promote trust and confidence, making efforts toward preserving peace and stability in the South China Sea. On many occasions, ASEAN and China have indicated their critical importance for both sides to uphold the DOC in its entirety. We should spare no effort via practical means and efficient work to ensure the Code of Conduct, or COC, be effective, substantive, and consistent with international law, particularly the UNCLOS. It's now apparent that the words of COVID-19 pandemic is behind us. We are still dealing with the COVID-19 legacy. Life after the pandemic needs to be rebuilt and also rethought. With the power of knowledge gathered under one roof here in Da Nang, I strongly believe that today's international conference would further enrich in the intellectual ground for ideas and initiatives, strengthening dialogue and cooperation in the South China Sea. With that in mind, I wish this conference a great success. And I also wish everybody good health, great happiness, and a joyful stay in Da Nang. Thank you very much.
Thank you, His Excellency, Mr. Pham Quang Hieu. And now we'll move on with a very special sessions, which is the keynote sessions. For these sessions, may I have the honor to invite Dr. Nguyen Hùng Sơn, Vice President of the Diplomatic Academy, to come on stage and join us as moderator.
Well, good morning, Excellencies, distinguished moderators, speakers, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor to serve as the moderator of today's keynote session titled Towards a Maritime Rules-Based Order. And on this special keynote session, we are very honored to be joined by Judge Kriyasak Kitishasari, International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. He'll be joining us online. We are also very honored to be joined by Rear Admiral Jürgen Earl, Senior Military Advisor of the European External Action Service of the European Union. Sir, may I invite you to come on stage to join me. The third speaker on this forum is Right Honorable Anne Marie Trevelyan, Minister for Indo-Pacific, Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom. Please welcome Rear Admiral Jürgen Earle to the podium. Now, I have the honor to invite Judge Kriyasak Kitishasari to deliver his remarks. He'll be joining us online. Judge Kriyasak, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, moderator. I hope all of you can hear me correctly, right?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you so much. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, this which must regret that I cannot be with you in person in Da Nang at this conference, despite all the travel arrangements we have already made. I'd like to share with you a few points within the time limit given to me. First, as His Excellency, the Vice Minister has just mentioned, ASEAN should play a prominent role in this regard. And I look at the agenda conference, it seems that something is missing. That is, the conference does not have on its agenda the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific, or AOIP, which was announced in Bangkok in the year 2019. One of the 4 key priority areas of which is maritime cooperation that covers all the areas to be discussed at this conference. And a few days ago in Phnom Penh, ASEAN has decided to operationalize AOIP to have projects with dialogue partners as well as interest parties. So this is something that maybe the conference should have a look at. My second point is that in spite of the long list of restrictions to third-party dispute settlements in Articles 297 and 298 of UNCLOS, international courts and tribunals have ruled that although a dispute which requires the determination of a question of territorial sovereignty may not be regarded as dispute concerning the interpretation or application of UNCLOS under Article 288, paragraph 1 of UNCLOS. These courts and tribunals have jurisdiction over dispute partly involving claims to territorial sovereignty, which is necessary for settling the UNCLOS dispute in question, and is merely ancillary to the UNCLOS dispute, unless the agreements expressly excludes such ancillary territorial dispute. My third point is that you look at Article 293, paragraph 1 of UNCLOS on applicable law. That provides that a court or tribunal having jurisdiction under UNCLOS shall apply UNCLOS and other rules of international law not incompatible with UNCLOS. As one can see from the ongoing South China Sea disputes, other rules of international law have been used to settle or manage the dispute, including the law, the UN Charter, and international rules on acquisition of territories, international cooperation, and peaceful coexistence. My fourth point is that the code of conduct for the South China Sea has not been finalized due to the difference of opinions of the parties on how to preserve their respective rights and entitlements under international law. With due respect to my colleagues, policy makers, it seems that the views of international lawyers have not been fully appreciated or emphasized. We have seen and heard so many rhetoric expressions, and this expression may not reflect the exact international legal rules. For example, the relevant rules you have to bear in mind is the rule customary international law on the so-called critical date, the rule on effectiveness of peaceful protest instead of using armed confrontation to safeguard territorial claims. Besides, the state concerned need to find feasible modality and substance for conflict management in the South China Sea through CBM confidence building measures, while also avoiding being drawn into geopolitical conflicts between China and the West. Now, on the issue of the critical date, it says that rights and entitlements are completely frozen at the time when a dispute crystallized, after which date no acts trying to improve the legal position of the party relying on them shall have any legal value whatsoever. With regard to protests under customary international law, timely notifications of protests against competing claims, together with reservation of rights through continued peaceful assertion of claims, are enough to rebut any presumption of acquiescence or estoppel in relation to the dispute in question. On CBMs, the parties need to come to an understanding of the nation's scope of activities they may either unilaterally or jointly undertake without prejudice to their respective claims. The non-permanent physical damage test has been used by international courts and tribunals. This is probably why projects such as joint marine scientific research and fish stock assessment have been proposed for dispute maritime areas, including in the South China Sea. The main problem in applying this test to the South China Sea context is that each of the parties to the disputes considers claims made by the other parties to have been made not in good faith. Therefore, the parties should try even more to come to a mutual understanding on the rules of critical date and peaceful protest as mentioned above, emphasizing that the without prejudice clause in the code of conduct ensures that there shall be no acquiescence or estoppel by any party to the claims made by other parties. In this connection, the principle of good faith rules out unilateralism altogether. Restraint from engaging particular acts beyond a certain point in a dispute maritime area or general abstention from acting in relation thereto has been interpreted by courts and tribunals in a positive light. For example, in the case between Indonesia and Malaysia, Nicaragua, Honduras, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, the International Court of Justice and ITLOS, as well as arbitral tribunal, have interpreted the so-called self-restraint as being born out of a desire not to negatively influence the ongoing dispute by adding complications or extending its duration. Therefore, restraint is not considered to be acceptance of the other disputing party's position at all. This is something that you have to bear in mind. Instead of listening to rhetoric or self-restraint, and what does it mean? Fifth, this is very important. There is possibility that sea level rise may completely submerge many of the geographical features in the South China Sea, which has served as basis to exert maritime claims. Several states, including member states of the Pacific Islands Forum and of the islands of small island states, have declared that their respective maritime boundaries shall remain as they are, notwithstanding any physical changes connected to climate change related sea level rise. A crucial question for the South China Sea is whether this alleged emerging regional customary rule of international law also applies to unsettled maritime claims. Would it be better to let the controversial geographical features in the South China Sea disappear completely, forever, and then all the problems will be solved? This is interesting because small island states in the South Pacific are planning to submit a request to ITLOS for advisory opinion on many issues that include the so-called status quo of maritime boundaries, maritime claims, as well as statehood. So this is something I think with due respect, the conference seemed to overlook. You know, if the problem disappears, then we stop coming to this kind of conference. The next thing is that one unresolved issue at the third UN conference on the Lower Sea was the issue of military uses in maritime zones of another state. Therefore, there are disagreements between several Southeast Asian states and many other steering states on the one side and maritime powers on the other side regarding activities of warships in their respective maritime zones. The issue has become more complex with the advance of technological innovation and the use of unmanned craft, autonomous ships, unmanned maritime vehicles belonging to a navy, the status of which has been subject to different interpretations among state parties to UNCLOS. Besides and apart from any geopolitical consideration, I have a question. Do states bordering the South China Sea share common international legal position as regards the so-called freedom navigations exercised by the USA and some other countries, especially in light of the new improvement in technologies and the superior cyber capabilities of maritime powers? Will the Asian states mentioned above re-examine and change their respective legal positions regarding military activities, including navigational rights in the various maritime areas, especially in the context area of the South China Sea? My next point is that we have heard so much about the so-called the need to exercise of the right of self-defense to take interest in dispute maritime areas in the South China Sea. With due respect, it seems that either international lawyers in the country concerned or policy makers fail to consider the judgment of International Court of Justice in Nicaragua against USA, the so-called mere frontier incidents are not armed attack that give rise to the right of self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter. So you have to look carefully, how do we distinguish mere frontier incidents? The use of law enforcement agencies to try to assert the rights in conflicting areas. How you distinguish that from an armed attack that give rise to Article 51 rights under the UN Charter? My last point is that state bordering the South China Sea should not ignore the human dimensions, namely the rights interests of peoples, human beings, which are duly protected under the convention. In this respect, UNCLOS has several provisions to protect peoples at sea, just as the rights of traditional fishers and the rights of seafarers to be saved from pirates. There is now a growing movement in Europe called human rights at sea. It is paragraph 3 of Article 73 of UNCLOS that has been widely abused. By virtue of this provision, coastal state penalties for violations of fisheries laws and regulations in the EEZ may not include imprisonment in the absence of agreements to the contrary by the state concerned or any other form of corporal punishment. To date, no state has ever concluded such agreement with another state. Unfortunately, there are numerous instances of fishers being imprisoned in this region for unauthorized fishing in the EEZ of the imprisoning state. ITLOS has compulsory jurisdiction over disputes as regard violations of Article 73, paragraph 3, but probably fishers lack bargaining power to convince the flag state through their fishing vessels owners or charterers to protect these fishers' rights, in which case their state of nationality may step in to exercise diplomatic protection in respect of the fishers who are its national. So these are the issues that I would like to just focus on within the time limit I have. And then I would say that I would be happy to take questions right now because as my colleague Bob Beckman from NUS has no, the connection on my part is not reliable. So any questions now, maybe I will be able to join you later on at the end of this session for answer and question. But while my internet is still working, I would take question right now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Judge Kriyasak Kitashasari, for, well, first of all, pointing us out that we need to focus more on the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. We will surely address that in the upcoming 2 days of discussion. But especially would like to thank you for highlighting the importance of UNCLOS and its accompanied regime that it's developed, particularly the dispute settlement regime, the regime of a critical date, which is so important in managing and resolving current maritime disputes. You also highlighted the need for the maritime law to also tackle emerging issues such as the sea level rise, such as the rising importance of technology in the maritime domain, and also new issues of international concerns such as the protections of the human dimensions on the maritime domain. So thank you very much for highlighting the importance of UNCLOS, especially on the occasions of its 40th anniversary. So Judge Kriyasak has expressed that he would like to take up the Q&A now because of the concern over the internet connection he has. So I'd like to welcome any questions from the floor now, as well as from our online participants before we move on to the second keynote speaker. Any questions right now? Please, well, yes, gentleman on the second row.
All right, okay, thank you. My name is Yonggu Bu. from the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore. Thank you very much, Judge, for your presentation. I want to ask just one question about an enforcement mechanism. So, it's one thing to come up with rules of maritime domain. It's completely separate thing to enforce these rules. So I want to know how you see the recent unilateral mechanisms such as AUKUS in the region. Do you see it as the order enhancing mechanism, or do you see it as a factor that introduces instability in the region, thereby weakening stability and order? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Judge
yes.
Priyasak, have got a question?
Yes, thank you very much. This is really very good question. The issue enforcement of international law has been a very sensitive issue, but I would say that you look at the South China Sea arbitration between the Philippines and China. Let's assume for the sake argument, that is without hurting the feelings of my Chinese colleagues, that the Philippines have won that arbitration. Then the Philippines had a moral high ground to cite the rulings of that arbitral tribunal to support its position. In other words, it's not a useless exercise. So when international law has been pronounced by an impartial international body, it has some kind of an aura, something which is magic. You look at the case between Ukraine and Russia it lost a few years ago. Ukraine won the case. The case concerned the arrest and imprisonment of the Russian authorities arrest 3 Ukrainian naval vessels and imprison a number of Ukrainian naval officers. And then when it lost held hearing, Russia refused to take part in the hearing, and we ruled almost unanimously in favor of Ukraine. But in spite of Russia's refusal to take part in the proceedings, soon after, Russia released the naval officers, not because of the ruling of it lost, but for the sake of quotation mark prisoner exchange. That is, Ukrainian authorities released Russian prisoners in exchange for the Russian releasing Ukrainian naval officers. And then the EU, USA cited the rulings of it lost to put pressure on Russia to release the ships. And there was even a summit meeting between President Putin, the then President Ukraine, in Paris, in the presence of the Chancellor of Germany and the President of France. And then even before the so-called arbitral tribunal instituted by Ukraine against Russia in The Hague, before the hearing started, a few days before that, Russia unconditionally released the 3 naval ships back to Ukraine. So this is something that you say that you have the law on your side, although you don't have the so-called police to enforce it. You have many, although you don't have the so-called police to enforce it. You have many moral high ground basis, as well as bargaining power leverage to make sure that it somehow is enforceable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a second hand being raised on this side. So please, the gentleman on the 3rd floor, please.
Good morning. I'm Renato De Castro from the Philippines. And my question is, again, related to the arbitral ruling. You mentioned about the Philippines having a moral high ground. Unfortunately, in the last 6 years, the previous administration, President Duterte, ignored the ruling. But now, fortunately, there's been a dramatic change. Even before he was inaugurated as the president of the Philippines, the current president acknowledged the ruling. And of course, the Department of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines has been given the go signal to push for this ruling. Now, what advice will you give to the Philippine government, given the fact that it has now acknowledged the ruling and is willing, of course, to put the money where its mouth is regarding, of course, the arbitral ruling? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for the very sensitive questions. But with due respect, it's not for an international judge to intervene in domestic affairs of the Philippines. So it's completely up to the Philippines government, which way it choose to implement the rulings. So maybe it's a matter of new policy, whether it's better to do it diplomatically or relying on the rule of law. Maybe there are some other benefits to be gained from not pursuing the legal enforcement. It happens also in domestic cases in which the winning party may find some other rules to settle dispute. So I prefer not to quotation mark, give the advice to the Philippines government, because it's not for a judge to intervene and then give advice to any government. You have to bring a case before my court, and then I will give you the answer.
Thank you very much. We have two more questions from the audience here and one online question, and then we'll have to move on, I'm afraid. So Richard Hadarian.
Hi, Richard Hidarian, also from the Philippines. I hope we're not talking too much. Thank you very much, Judge, for that very excellent opening on a very litigious and sensitive issue. I just had a question, Your Honor. To what degree does the ruling in the case of the Philippines and China set a precedence as far as arbitration is concerned? Because it was a case of compulsory arbitration, and China's invocation of exemption clauses under the UNCLOS apparently were not considered by the court. Because I know you mentioned about consent, mutuality, all of those principles, but clearly here we have a case of compulsory arbitration. Does this set a major precedence, and to what degree does it change the direction of the relevance and application of UNCLOS when it comes to other disputes and similar cases around the world? Thank you.
The arbitration between the Philippines and China was based on the so-called Annex 7 exception. That is, at the third UN conference, states focus on consent to jurisdiction of international court and tribunals listed under the relevant provisions of UNCLOS. But there is the so-called default or residual mechanism. If the parties cannot agree to come to compulsory jurisdiction mechanism, they have to accept arbitration. So this is one of the examples. There are other examples, case brought by Russia, Ukraine against Russia, at least two. Also, the case brought by, so this is just one example. So the point is that the fact that one of the parties refused to agree doesn't mean that it is not bound by the ruling, because according to UNCLOS, as well as international jurisprudence, the non-appearance of one of the parties cannot veto the proceedings. So this is the point. But the main issue is that which has been disputed by the Chinese legal scholars, are the reasoning of the arbitral tribunal in that case. They even have two issues of Chinese Journal International Law dedicated to refusing the jurisdictional basis as well as substantive basis of the reasoning of the tribunal. So this the state that we have, but the point is non-appearance by the party cannot veto the proceedings. And regarding the substantive rulings, as a judge, I prefer not to criticize or comment on reasonings of my colleagues and friends. So these are the road. I hope that I answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Judge Kriyasak. We have Professor Lei Xiao Lu from online. Can you ask your question, please, Professor Liu?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Your Excellency, Judge KK. And long time no see, I'm from Wuhan University. And I have a question relating to the military activities, the jurisprudence before the ITLOS. And I noted that you just mentioned about the military activities issues. And I think that the jurisprudence concerning the dispute concerning the military activities in the ITLOS, before the ITLOS, and the following arbitrations between Ukraine and the Russia Federation are completely different from the arbitral board of the South China Sea arbitration. Do you think that the ITLOS will clarify some of the issues concerning the military activities, especially relating to the Article 298 of the Convention in the future? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. I think you look at the judgment in the case between Ukraine and Russia in ITLOS. Russia invoked the military activities exception, but we reject it. And as I explained in my individual opinions, many states use the Navy to enforce its domestic law at sea. So you have to look at the nature of the activities, not who enforce the law or undertake activities at sea. So in the nature, in the case between Ukraine and Russia, you look at the, very carefully at the time frames, the sequence of actions listed by the parties, to which point do the activities cease to be law enforcement? When will military activities start? So I will answer your questions very, very briefly, because there is now a case pending in arbitral tribunal between Ukraine and Russia, and this issue will be decided on the merits. So to summarize, you look at the nature, at the sequence of events, are the events something that are usually undertaken by law enforcement.
I'm sorry, Judge Kriyasak. I think the line has become choppy. So I'll end your session here, Judge. I hope you'll stay around with us for further Q&As afterwards. But I thank you very much for your presentation, as well as for the very lively interactions with our audience here. There are still many questions in the waiting, so I hope you'll stay with us for further Q&A after the other two presentations. So let me now invite Rear Admiral John Le, the Senior Military Advisor of the European External Action Service of the European Union. I apologize for keeping you waiting. Please.
Does it? Okay, now it works. Thank you. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished audience. First of all, I would like to thank the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam for organizing this event, and above all, for inviting me from the EES, from the European External Action Service, to deliver a speech and to participate in this very important conference. For me personally, it is truly a special pleasure, as it is for me the first time being in Vietnam, this beautiful country. My intent today is to highlight the strategic significance of the South China Sea for the European Union within the Indo-Pacific region, and to underline why the EU will remain committed to its partners in the region to uphold the rules-based international order. As we underlined in our new strategic document, the Strategic Compass, international norms are under direct assault across many fronts, and especially nowadays with the Russian aggression of Ukraine. The EU has a vital geopolitical and economic interest in the stability and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region, and therefore in the security of the maritime domain and of all the littoral states in the South China Sea. As underlined in the EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, the futures of the EU and the Indo-Pacific are inextricably linked given the interdependence of the economies and the common global challenges. The region includes 7 G20 members: Australia, China, India, Indonesia, Japan, the Republic of Korea, and the Republic of South Africa, and as well as the ASEAN, which is an increasingly important partner of the European Union. The region, ladies and gentlemen, is home to 3/5 of the world's population. It produces 60% of global GDP, contributed 2/3 of pre-pandemic global economic growth, and is at the forefront of digital economy. At the same time, the Indo-Pacific region has emerged as a new center of intense geopolitical competition, especially the one between the United States and China, that will shape the geopolitical landscape in Asia and beyond, towards Europe and Africa. Given the fact that 7 of the world's 10 largest armies, 5 of the world's declared nuclear nations, and some of the most advanced navies reside in the Indo-Pacific, the world at large is paying attention to the strategic evolutions in the region. Let me highlight in this context China's military spending. China has increased over the past years defense expenditure and technological innovation. China seeks to have the most technologically advanced forces, and China's military spending is in the region of almost $300 billion and only second to the United States. Today, the Chinese Navy is the largest in the world in terms of number of vessels. It is estimated that the Navy has more than 355 vessels in its fleet, including 3 aircraft carriers, more than 50 destroyers, approximately 50 frigates, 70 corvettes, approximately 80 submarines. China's Navy today is bigger than the United States Navy with 296 ships. To illustrate, every 5 years, the Chinese Navy is growing by the size of the entire French Navy. China relies on its growing Navy to enforce its will and advance its national interests in the East China Sea, the South China Sea, parts of the Western Pacific. And China will therefore maintain its ambitions to increase military capabilities further. At the opening of the 1 in 5 year Communist Party Congress in Beijing, President Xi Jinping said that China would accelerate the building of an excellent military and strengthen its ability to build a strategic deterrent capability. We live in an area of strategic rivalries and complex security threats, several of which are located in the Indo-Pacific. The region hosts major waterways of vital global economic importance, including the Malacca Strait, the South China Sea, and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Almost half the global container fleet and nearly 90% of the world's largest ships pass through the Taiwan Strait every year. In the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy, which we adopted last year, we highlighted that the display of force and increasing tensions in regional hotspots in the South and East China Sea and in the Taiwan Strait may have a direct impact on European security and prosperity. Through the Indo-Pacific strategy, the EU aims to contribute to the stability, security, and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific region while promoting democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and respect for international law. In the wake of the war in Ukraine, the EU's strategic engagement in the Indo-Pacific is more relevant than ever. What happens in Ukraine will have an impact on the Indo-Pacific region as well. Intense geopolitical competition and increasing tensions in the South and East China Sea and in the Taiwan Strait make it plain for all to see that the Indo-Pacific region is of vital geo-economic and geopolitical importance in today's and tomorrow's world. In this global picture, the South China Sea remains a key area. You all know better than me that the South China Sea alone accounts for 12% of the global fish catch and half the world's fishing vessels. And for us in the European Union of most importance, approximately 40% of our foreign trade is going through the South China Sea. Needless to say that we have a genuine interest in peace and security in the South China Sea, as well as cooperation on maritime security. More than 90% of global foreign trade is conducted by sea, much of it via the Indian and Pacific Oceans. 80% of EU exports take place by sea, and up to 25% of seaborne world trade passes through the Strait of Malacca, just to give you some numbers. Every day, more than 2,000 ships transport trade goods between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea through this eye of a needle. Free sea lines of communications and the freedom of navigation are crucial. And to put it in a nutshell, no shipping, no shopping. The EU remains seriously concerned about the situation in the South China Sea. We strongly oppose any unilateral actions that increase tensions and undermine regional stability and the rules-based international order. And the EU urges all parties to refrain from the threat or use of force, to exercise self-restraint. And the EU is committed to maintaining a secure and rules-based maritime order in accordance with UNCLOS, which has been addressed by the previous speaker, in all the maritime commons. And it is important to emphasize the universal and unified character of UNCLOS, which sets out the legal framework that governs all activities in the oceans and the seas. I need to underline that ASEAN is one of the most important organizations with which the EU cooperates to help preserve peace and security in Southeast Asia. The EU appreciates ASEAN's commitment to effective multilateralism and supports the principle of ASEAN centrality, its efforts to build a rules-based regional architecture, and the multilateral anchor that it provides. EU-ASEAN cooperation also covers a wide range of security issues, including through the ASEAN Regional Forum, ARF. Under this framework, as we are heading to a very substantial EU-ASEAN summit next month, I want to reiterate that the EU supports the ASEAN-led process towards a code of conduct in the South China Sea, which should be effective, substantive, and legally binding, and not prejudice the interests of any third parties. Transparency from the negotiating partners for the code of conduct is of utmost importance. Before I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, let me very briefly introduce our concept of coordinated maritime presences, in short, CMP. Taking the role as a global maritime security provider, we are strengthening our cooperation in the maritime security domain by enhancing cooperation amongst EU member states. This is why we established this concept in 2019. The Coordinated Maritime Presences tool will allow the EU to act together by enhancing coordination of the existing member states' naval and air assets present in specific areas that are of interest to the EU around the world, to increase our capacity to act as a reliable partner and maritime security provider. Following the successful implementation of the pilot case of the CMP concept in the Gulf of Guinea in 2021, the EU is expanding the CMP concept to the northwestern Indian Ocean very soon. This shows our commitment to reinforce our strategic focus and actions in this region by enhancing a European naval presence to contribute to its stability, security, and prosperity, and deepening our partnership with like-minded countries even further. Now, to conclude, I would like to leave you with two messages. The first is that following the implementation of our strategic document, the Strategic Compass, you will find in the EU a clear support for tailored partnerships, which means adopting a more realistic approach to our common objectives and capabilities, but also taking into account our mutual interests based on regular exchanges and coordination. We can do more, and we can do it better. The second is that we are living in challenging times, and we need, as like-minded countries, to believe in the centrality of universal rules and laws, ensure and uphold the free access to the global commons for all countries in order to secure the opportunities to pursue a greater prosperity and to strengthen our resilience. However, no country can do this alone. So let us cooperate more together. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rear Admiral Jürgen Earle, for your impeccable remarks and for highlighting the developments in the Indo-Pacific region directly impact EU security and prosperity. You also highlighted the importance of the East China Sea as well as the South China Sea for EU's trade and prosperity overall. Also the role of ASEAN as a key player in the region, and therefore you highlighted the importance of the EU-ASEAN partnership. Thank you also for briefing us on the coordinated maritime presence and the strategic compass strategy document by the European Union. Thank you very much. Let us now proceed with the third keynote presenter who will deliver a pre-recorded message. So please go ahead and play the pre-recorded video from Right Honorable Annie Mary Trevelyan from the Minister for Indo-Pacific Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the United Kingdom.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to address this important gathering, which the UK is glad to support. I'm grateful to the Diplomatic Academy of Vietnam for bringing us together. This is a great opportunity to discuss recent developments in the South China Sea, to strengthen our partnerships and find new ways to address shared challenges. Recent global events such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the pandemic, and efforts to tackle climate change highlight what's at stake in preserving peace and prosperity globally. As a key trade route and as support for the livelihoods of billions of people, the South China Sea plays a critical role in those efforts and in tackling the formidable challenges that we face. We will continue to make clear our concerns about actions which raise tensions, which we know are shared by a wide range of our partners. These actions have risked dangerous miscalculation and placed the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea under increasing pressure. For 40 years, UNCLOS has been the legal framework for activities in the ocean and seas, and the UK's support for it is unwavering. We must ensure that international law, freedom of navigation and oversight are respected. We set out our position in Parliament 2 years ago and reaffirmed this with partners in a G7 communiqué this year. Where there are disputes, we urge parties to settle them through existing legal mechanisms, particularly those established by UNCLOS. We object to any claims not founded in UNCLOS, including China's claims, which have been ruled incompatible with UNCLOS by the 2016 Arbitral Award. We welcome all initiatives that bring claimant states together and ensure regional stability. In particular, negotiations to agree a substantive and effective code of conduct that supports and complements UNCLOS and reflects the legitimate interests of third countries. Now, beyond maritime law, on land as much as at sea, the whole Indo-Pacific region is hugely important to the UK. Indeed, it is critical to our economy and to upholding the international rules and norms that underpin free trade, security, and stability. My colleague, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, visited Japan, the Republic of Korea, and Singapore soon after his appointment, where he reaffirmed the UK's strategic focus to the Indo-Pacific and our commitment to strengthening partnerships across the region. We recognise the centrality of ASEAN to the region and the essential contribution it makes to peace, to prosperity and security. As ASEAN's newest dialogue partner, we value deepened cooperation, including on delivering the ASEAN-UK Plan of Action. We take our responsibility to support those efforts seriously, particularly when it comes to maritime security and efforts to tackle climate change. We are stepping up maritime security cooperation through a comprehensive programme aimed at bolstering regional resilience. This includes supporting ASEAN officials to participate in a leading international law of the sea course. We also organised the 9th Ocean Dialogue Conference here in Hanoi in collaboration with the Diplomatic Academy to enhance joint maritime scientific research across the South China Sea. We are supporting regional understanding of maritime security and UNCLOS, including through a Royal Navy training session earlier this year for representatives from Southeast Asian nations. Meanwhile, we are working to protect and enhance the marine environment and build sustainable blue economies in the region. This is backed by our £500 million Blue Planet Fund and £150 million of investment in our Global Coast Programme. We are also in regular talks with partners to understand and address regional concerns. So we look forward to continuing work in all of these areas of vital interest to all our people. Together, we can promote a strong, stable and secure South China Sea. So I wish you all the best for a successful conference. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Right Honorable Annie Mary Trevelyan, for your very in-depth remarks. And thank you for recognizing the importance of maritime cooperation. And we'd like to acknowledge, well, the very active contributions from our latest dialogue partners of ASEAN to regional cooperations, especially maritime cooperations in the region in areas of climate change, of marine environment and blue economies, as you highlighted. So thank you very much. Now let us open the floor for questions and answer. And I'd like to once again invite questions from the floor as well as from our online participants to Rear Admiral Jürgen Erle. Please, any questions from the floor? Yes, gentleman from the second row. Can you please kindly introduce yourself and raise your question?
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'm Butinka from Hanoi University of Natural Resources and Environment. And I would like to thank all of the speakers for the very interesting speech. And I have one question to Rear Admiral Jürgen Erle. And in fact, you know that in your speech, you highlighted the importance of the security and stability in the South China Sea and East China Sea. And I think that now we have a serious problem relating to the South China Sea. As a recent year, I would like to say that 2 years ago, the Chinese survey ship, that one is they did the seismic exploration, or in many the EEZ of many countries surrounding the South China Sea. For example, the Philippines, the Malaysia and Vietnam. And I think that they do it not just for game. For example, someday they do the exploration. They bring oil drill in the easy of the countries, and maybe due to that one country in the South China Sea should have something like a military response, and in that case, what Europe should the response of Europe and the US? Do you guess? Thank you.
Would you like to take the question?
Yes, thank you for the question. As I said, it is basically up to the EU member states if they want to deploy ships to the South China Sea and show presence. And it is a very sensitive topic, especially for my country, where I come from. I'm from Germany. And it is always a decision, a political decision to show maritime presence. As I said, as far as the European Union is concerned, we introduce now this concept to enhance our maritime presence in the Northwestern Indian Ocean. That is very clear. But what you ask for an European answer to all this. No? We had recently a summit in Brussels where all the heads of state and government discussed issues, also the further relations to China. And this is also a point where the European Union talks with the Chinese leadership about the South China Sea, freedom of navigations, free sea lines of communication. And I wanted here to make it very clear. For us, for the European Union, China is very clearly a systemic rival. It's an economic competitor, but, and this is also laid out in our Indo-Pacific strategy, that we keep the diplomatic channels open. You cannot, for instance, tackle climate change. That means very global issues without talking to China. So we try also to talk to China with diplomatic means to keep the sea lines of communication open. There will be no, to be very bluntly, no military European response to that, but we try to do it in this way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have the gentleman from Lee Kuan Yew School again, and then Dino.
Right, Yong Hong Liu from the Lee Kuan Yew School, NUS. My question is about the geographic scope of coordinated maritime presence of EU. So you did mention Indian Ocean in your speech, and obviously in the South China Sea, right? You will extend out, right, your maritime coordinate presence in the South China Sea. Does it extend out to the Taiwan Strait and East China Sea for Europeans? So if you can shed the European thinking and debate on the geographic, right, boundaries and scope of the coordinated maritime presence, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. This concept foresees that the European Union engages or defines maritime hotspots in the world, and the 27 member states of the European Union decide where to engage. As I said, the first pilot project was a maritime hotspot in West Africa, in the Gulf of Guinea, where you have a toxic mix of all maritime crimes you can imagine. And now we want to extend our maritime hotspot first to the Northwestern Indian Ocean. And I can show you the geographic borders later. It's basically around the Strait of Hormuz and extending more to the northwestern region, more to the Indian Ocean. So currently, the South China Sea itself is not a maritime hotspot where we engage. But when member states decide, I mean, we are completely in the European External Action Service in the hands of member states. If member states decide to extend this area or to define a new maritime hotspot, it's completely up to the 27 member states. And what is this concept about? Just to give you a little bit more explanation. So member states send or show maritime presence in the maritime hotspot area, which is defined, for instance, in the Gulf of Guinea or in the northwestern Indian Ocean. They send ships, but more important, they cooperate very closely together with all the countries, with all the adjacent countries, very closely together in maritime security. Maritime exercises, exercises with ships, with naval assets, but also how to enhance maritime security for the benefit of the countries in the region and for the benefit of the European Union.
Thank you very much. Dino, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. You explain or underline the concern about China's naval development. I'm right here, by the way. Okay, right. So you underlined your concern about Chinese military and naval development in the region. I'm just wondering, and EU's response to it. I'm just wondering, what are EU's plan for confidence building measures with China? Any specific plans? So that's one point. The second thing is, look, I understand that you explained that there'll be more deployment by EU naval forces in our region, and we understand the strategic rationale for it. But my advice is, don't assume that the countries in this region is going to be automatically politically comfortable with it, right? Because, as I said, we understand the strategic rationale, but we're also worried about geostrategic condensation in this region. And for us, is this going to be also a challenge to explain to our own people, look, why are there suddenly more and more European vessels in the seas nearby, in the context of growing rivalries? It's not so easily explained to our domestic audience as well. Yeah. So those 2 points. Thank you.
This is a very good question. Thank you. This concept is not about to impose something on the countries in the region. I made last year at the Shangri-La dialogue a very good experience. So many Asian countries said, they don't want to be squeezed in the conflict of the major powers between the United States and China. So and also they said, we would like to that the European Union it's a credible partner that we want to more cooperate with. And when I visit the region, countries, be it Singapore or Indonesia or other countries, they always ask for more naval presence of the European Union. I mean, we have the impression that there is a wish that we engage more in the future, but this concept is nothing to impose something on the countries, to cooperate, to keep them involved, to cooperate closely with our like-minded partners, to make this very clear. I understand what you're trying to say, but this is not our intention at all. Just for the benefit of two of us. Yeah, and confidence building measures, China, I mean, we have a yearly strategic dialogue with China on security and defense. And here in these dialogues, we very frankly and very clear state our positions toward China. And we try to do our best to get any confidence building measures out of it. So as I said, the channels to China are open. We discuss with them. I personally meet regularly with the Chinese defense advisor in Brussels. It's a major general, and we make our positions, and believe me, that very, very clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one last question from the gentleman from the very back row over there, and then we'll have to proceed to the next session.
Yeah, thank you very much. My name is Nguyen Ba Cương. I am director of the Scientific Research Institute in Ireland. And thank you very much, admire Jagan, for very inspiring presentation. I just have one small question. In your presentation, you said that you would like to deepen relationship with the like-minded countries who try to apply, enforce, and secure international law and globally rule-based order. I was wondering, do you think that India, China, and Vietnam are the like-minded states in that terms? Thank you.
Can you ask your question again?
My question is, do you think that India, China, and Vietnam are the like-minded states in your terms, in your definitions, that you would like to deepen relationships?
No, China is certainly not a like-minded partner of the European Union, but Vietnam is a like-minded partner, and I can assure you that.
How about India?
That we are very happy if Vietnam, for instance, will participate in future in one our military operations, in our EU training missions in the Central African Republic. So we have here close relationship. And also what we also do, we have also a very intense dialogue between European Union and India regards the cooperation in the Indo-Pacific.
Well, thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I think we have many more questions coming from our online participants as well as from the audience here. But unfortunately, we've eaten out all the time we have for this session. So please kindly join me in expressing our gratitudes for Judge Kriyasak Kitachasari and Rear Admiral John Early, as well as Right Honorable Anne-Marie Trevelyan for their excellent remarks as well as interactions with the audience. What's the impressions that I'm left with is an enormous spirit of cooperations and willingness for engagement with the Indo-Pacific and with ASEAN in particular to promote cooperations, especially maritime cooperations, to also enhance dialogues and also to uphold the rule of law. So that is a very key message that I think this keynote session we are left with. So thank you very much, and please join me in expressing our gratitude.
Thank you, Dr. Sen. Thank you all. Very wonderful keynote speech panelists. And now may we proceed to the session one of the South China Sea Conference hosted by the DAV. Session one will be about the latest development in multifaceted areas in the South China Sea. And for session one, it is my honor to invite His Excellencies, the Ambassador of the European Union to Vietnam, Mr. Giorgio Aliberti, to join us on stage, please.